By the time Raymond Solano understood what had happened to him, it was already over. His accounts were frozen, his partners had stopped returning his calls, and the woman he'd publicly humiliated at a charity gala 3 weeks earlier was sitting across from Dante Morretti. Not as a guest, not as a date, but as the person who had just handed Dante everything he needed to end Raymond's career in one clean move. This is the story of how Celia Vance walked into the wrong event in a borrowed dress and walked out owning the room without anyone realizing it until it was far too late. The Hartwell Foundation Gala was the kind of event where money dressed itself up as charity. The venue was a converted warehouse in the West Loop, exposed brick, chandelier installations, waiters in white gloves carrying champagne flutes to people who would have stepped over a homeless man to get inside. The guest list was curated, the seating was deliberate, and every table placement communicated something about where you stood in the city's invisible hierarchy. Celia Vance did not belong there, not according to Raymond Solano. She had come with her colleague Marcus Webb, a junior partner at the nonprofit consultancy hired to advise the foundation on donor strategy. Marcus had gotten sick at the last minute. Food poisoning, he said, though Celia suspected the open bar at the pre-event dinner, and had handed her his invitation with the casual carelessness of someone who didn't understand what they were giving away. Celia had been doing the foundation's financial forensics for 4 months. She knew their books better than anyone in that room. She simply had no business being there socially. She wore a navy dress that belonged to her neighbor, Louise, a size too small at the hips, pulling slightly at the seam, longer than current fashion recommended. She'd fixed her hair herself. She had not, she decided on the cab ride over, any reason to feel ashamed about any of this. Celia was a forensic accountant, 34 years old, with a particular build that she'd stopped apologizing for sometime around her 27th birthday. She was not slight. She was not what the women at table 12 would call put together. What she was the person who had spent the last 16 weeks quietly mapping every dollar the Hartwell Foundation had moved in the past 6 years, including the ones it wasn't supposed to have moved. She found her table, sat down, and began observing. Raymond Solano found her 40 minutes later. He was the kind of man who needed an audience to feel himself. Mid-50s, silver hair he wore like a credential, a tuxedo that cost more than Celia's monthly rent. He had made his money in real estate and had subsequently made himself a fixture at every charitable event in the city because it was cheaper than earning a reputation honestly. He was also, Celia already knew, embezzling from the foundation at a rate of roughly $340,000 annually, through a layered series of vendor invoices attached to a shell company registered to his brother-in-law in Delaware. She had known this for 3 weeks. She had told no one yet. Raymond Solano stopped at her table with a glass of whiskey and a smile he'd been using since 1987. "I don't think we've met," he said. He looked at her the way certain men look at something that has appeared where it shouldn't. "You're not a regular face." "No," Celia said, "I'm not." "Marcus Webb's guest?" He'd clearly checked the seating arrangement. "Where is Marcus?" "Unwell." "Unfortunate." He let a pause land. Then he turned to the couple seated beside her, the Holloways, old money, patient smiles, and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "I do think the foundation should be more selective with its plus ones. The dress code alone." And he let his eyes move over Celia once, slow, deliberate. The kind of look designed to catalog and dismiss. Well, some people don't quite fit the room, do they? The Holloways produced the polite silence of people who found this uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to intervene. A woman 2 seats down covered a small sound with her champagne glass. Raymond smiled at his own observation the way a man smiles at a joke he's told many times. Celia looked at him, not up at him, level, unhurried. "The room seems to fit fine," she said. Raymond's smile didn't disappear. It just stopped being genuine, which for him was almost the same thing. He moved on. Psychologists call what Raymond Solano deployed that evening instrumental aggression. Hostility used not from emotional dysregulation, but as a calculated social tool to establish dominance. Dr. Susan Fiske's research on social hierarchy and dehumanization found that people at the perceived top of status hierarchies are most likely to target those they consider boundary violations, people who appear in spaces they weren't expected to occupy. Raymond didn't humiliate Celia because he was angry. He did it because her presence was a category error and he needed the room to agree. She gave him no reaction he could use. That was the first thing Dante Morretti noticed. Dante had been at the Foundation gala because the Foundation had approached him 6 months ago about a partnership. Conservation work in the river districts, the kind of thing that cleaned up a public profile without requiring much personal effort. He was 41, dark-featured, quiet in the particular way of men who don't need a room's attention to know they have it. He ran operations across 3 states. He did not typically attend charity events personally, but his associate had flagged something irregular in the Foundation's financials before they signed anything, and Dante had come to watch. He had been watching Raymond Solano for 90 minutes before Raymond reached Celia's table. He watched the exchange. He watched the table's reaction. He watched Celia Vance's face, which did not collapse, did not flush, did not ask the room for rescue. She simply looked at Raymond Solano as though he were a variable she had already accounted for. Dante did not intervene. He filed it. Nobody in that room understood yet what they had just watched. They'd seen a man be casually cruel to a woman in a borrowed dress. What they hadn't seen was the woman decide, in that same moment, to accelerate her timeline by 3 weeks. Celia left the gala at 9:47 p.m., took the last of the photos she needed on her phone, vendor contracts, the Foundation's public financial summary pinned to a corkboard in the lobby hallway, the name placards at Raymond's table, including 2 men she'd been trying to identify for weeks, and went home to finish the report she had already been building. She was not, she thought on the cab ride back, doing this because of Raymond Solano. She was doing this because she had found something that needed to be found. The fact that Raymond had chosen tonight to remind her that he did not see her as a person of consequence, that was simply a bonus. It clarified things. It made the edges sharp. She worked until 4 a.m. By morning, the report was complete. She sent it to 3 parties simultaneously: the Illinois Attorney General's Office, the Foundation's Board of Directors, and the Federal Nonprofit Oversight Division. She sent a copy through a separate and carefully considered channel to Dante Morretti's holding company, with a cover note that read only, "I believe you were looking for this before signing anything. CV." She did not sign it with her full name. She didn't need to. He'd seen her at the table. What happened next took 11 days. The Foundation's board moved first. They suspended Raymond Solano from his advisory position pending internal review within 48 hours of receiving Celia's report. His co-signatories, the 2 men from the name placards, quietly withdrew from their own ventures before they were named publicly. Raymond hired attorneys. The attorneys reviewed the documentation Celia had assembled and told Raymond in private that the documentation was airtight. Raymond spent day 7 trying to find out who had filed the report. He had sources on the board. He had sources in the AG's office. What he found eventually was a name, a forensic accountant, a consultant who had been quietly embedded in the Foundation's books for 4 months, a woman who had been at his table on the night of the gala. He did not at first believe it. That was his second mistake. His first mistake had been made 3 weeks earlier at a table in the West Loop when he'd treated her like she wasn't there. He escalated. He had people who escalated things. He put pressure on Marcus Webb's consultancy, suggesting that Celia had misrepresented credentials, had accessed documents improperly, that the entire report was the work of someone with a personal agenda. He called in favors. He tried to slow the legal machinery by introducing noise into it. On day 9, Celia received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end told her that her access to certain financial systems had been flagged, and that she might want to consider whether continuing to cooperate with the investigation was in her personal interest. she recorded the call. She sent the recording to the AG's office. She also that evening received a different call, this one from a number she did not recognize either. But the voice was different, measured, not threatening. "Ms. Vance," Dante Morretti said, "I think we should meet." They met at a restaurant in River North that didn't have a visible sign. Dante was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she came in, not performatively, just as a thing a certain kind of person does. He waited until she had ordered before he said anything substantive. "The report," he said. "You had it for 3 weeks before you filed it, yes? Why the delay?" Celia considered how to answer this. "I was verifying," she said. "When something is this clean, you check it twice. Then you check who might try to complicate it after the fact, and you build for that." Dante looked at her for a moment. "You anticipated the interference." "I anticipated Raymond Solano," she said. "He's been in this city for 25 years. He knows how to create noise. I wanted the documentation to be loud enough that the noise didn't matter." "It was," Dante said. He asked her about the shell company structure. She explained it. He asked about the vendor invoicing pattern. She explained that too. He asked questions that were not the questions of someone making polite conversation. They were the questions of someone who understood the architecture of what she'd built and was checking it the same way she had. At some point he said, "You took a significant personal risk with that recording." "Less than leaving it unrecorded," she said. After a moment, Dante said, "I've been in rooms my entire life with people who are good at performing competence." He paused. "You're not performing," Celia said. "Neither are you." Raymond Solano's formal charge came down on day 11. The AG moved faster than he had expected. He'd counted on the noise he'd created buying him more time. It hadn't. The documentation Celia had assembled was structured in a way that addressed every anticipated objection before it could be raised. At the same moment Raymond was receiving that call from his attorney, Dante was making 2 of his own. The first was to Raymond's 2 remaining business partners in the city. The content of that conversation was not recorded. Its effects were observable within 24 hours. The second call was brief and made to someone at a publication with sufficient circulation that what Raymond had said at a charity gala 3 weeks prior, the comment about the dress code, about fitting the room, was included as color in the profile piece that ran on day 14, alongside a photograph of Celia Vance that she had approved and a summary of the report she'd filed. Raymond Solano gave no comment. Dante Morretti, according to the people who had worked with him for years, did not make gestures. He made decisions. There was a difference. Gestures were for audiences. Decisions were for outcomes. What he offered Celia was not a gesture. He had a foundation of his own, smaller, quieter, a portfolio of 3 nonprofit organizations that operated in the city and needed financial oversight from someone who understood not just accounting, but the particular architecture of discretion. He offered her a consulting contract. The rate was specific. The scope of work was specific. He did not offer it as protection. He offered it because she was the most precise person he had encountered in a long time. And precision in his world was the rarest thing. John Gottman, after 4 decades of studying how humans build durable bonds, found that what creates lasting connection is not shared pleasure but the experience of being fundamentally seen, recognized not for your surface presentation but for what you actually are and what you actually do. Celia Vance and Dante Morretti had, in 11 days, seen each other with more accuracy than most people manage in years. She read the contract. She found 2 clauses she wanted amended. She told him. He amended them. She signed. Later, much later, she would think about the borrowed dress, about the cab to the West Loop, about the particular quality of Raymond Solano's gaze, inventorying, dismissive, categorizing her as something that did not fit. She had not, in that moment, given him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. She had given him something better. She had given him 3 more weeks of believing she was exactly what he thought she was, an oversight, a background figure, someone who had wandered into the wrong room. He had been entirely right about the dress. It was borrowed. It did pull at the seams. It was not the dress of someone who belonged in that room. He had been entirely wrong about everything else. There is something almost poetic about the fact that Raymond Solano's mistake was not cruelty. Cruelty was just his instrument. His real mistake was the assumption underneath it, that a woman who didn't fit his visual category of consequence couldn't possibly be the person holding everything he was about to lose. He looked at Celia Vance and saw a category error. She looked at Raymond Solano and saw a case file she'd already completed. The room, in the end, fit exactly as well as she'd needed it to. Sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thought to watch. If this story stayed with you, a like takes 2 seconds and tells the algorithm something worth knowing. Subscribe if you want the next story, because where power actually lives is rarely where people think to look.